Remove those birds now!
I dare you.
I didn't plan on turning the lawn in front of my house into a federal migratory bird sanctuary protected by the government. I swear. I'm just a normal graphic designer paying my mortgage on time and enjoying watching a few goldfinches in the morning. But when Brenda, the woman who treats the uniformity of the beige lawn like a religion, decided to fine me $100 a day just for 3 wooden bird feeders, I made a decision. I didn't break her rules. I weaponized them. If she banned a small wooden feeder, I would plant an entire forest of native berry bushes and dig an artificial stream to invite thousands of migratory birds to nest right in front of her bedroom window. To understand how this neighborhood Cold War escalated into a federal maritime and ecological standoff, you have to understand the community of Whispering Pines. Despite the name, there are absolutely zero pines whispering or otherwise. What we do have is an engineered grid of identical suburban houses painted in one of 3 board-approved soul-crushing shades: desert sand Navajo white or subtle taupe. The grass is mandated to be precisely 2.5 inches tall. If your lawn hits 3 inches, you receive a certified letter. If your trash cans remain on the curb for more than 27 minutes past the Tuesday afternoon pickup deadline, a neon-colored warning is slapped on your garage door. The HOA did not view these regulations as guidelines. They viewed them as the thin beige line separating civilization from absolute chaotic anarchy. It was a sterile, manicured paradise of absolute compliance, designed by people who believed that individuality was a threat to neighborhood safety and property values. At the head of this aesthetic dictatorship sat Brenda Holloway. Brenda was a retired corporate middle manager who had channeled her lifelong obsession with micromanagement into the volunteer position of HOA president. She was a woman who seemingly slept with a clipboard under her pillow. Her daily routine consisted of driving a custom taupe-colored electric golf cart around the cul-de-sac, measuring the distance between mailboxes and curbs with a retractable steel tape measure, and deadheading roses with a pair of red-handled clippers that she brandished like a scepter. She held her clipboard against her chest like a ballistic shield, and her visor was pulled so low it was practically a welder's mask. Every footstep she took was a calculated stride in her quest for total unyielding control over the physical environment of our neighborhood. My interaction with the beige inquisition began on a crisp Tuesday morning. I was sitting at my kitchen island nursing my first cup of freshly ground dark roast, trying to mentally prepare for a 9-hour Zoom marathon with a client who wanted a dental adhesive logo to look more adventurous. Through my double-paned front window, I watched Brenda's golf cart whisper to a stop at the edge of my lawn. She stepped out her pristine white orthopedic sneakers, clicking rhythmically against my driveway. Clack, clack, clack. She marched up to my 3 modest bird feeders, simple cedar structures I had hung from the low branches of my maple tree. She pulled out her tape measure, frowned, and made a sharp, aggressive checkmark on her clipboard. 10 minutes later, I walked out to my porch to retrieve the mail, only to find a heavy cream-colored envelope doused in the scent of lavender and administrative judgment taped to my door. It was an official notice of violation, according to Brenda's reading of the Gilded Oaks Covenants, Conditions, and Restrictions. CCNRs, my bird feeders, were classified as unauthorized detached structures under Section 4.7c. Furthermore, she had cited me under Section 3.2a for the attraction of nuisance vermin. By vermin, she meant the family of northern cardinals, chickadees, and American goldfinches that regularly visited the yard. The letter demanded the immediate removal of the feeders within 48 hours, accompanied by an initial fine of $700, followed by a compounding penalty of $100 for every single day the violation remained uncorrected. I looked out at the maple tree. A bright red cardinal was sitting on the top perch, tilting its head as if reading the citation. "Don't worry, buddy," I muttered. "They're not taking you down." Brenda had first-hand experience in breaking homeowners' spirits, but she had made a fatal error. She assumed I was just another resident who would fold under the threat of a lien. She didn't realize that in my professional life, I spent 40 hours a week untangling complex design codes and debugging systems. I didn't want to fight Brenda's rules. I wanted to crawl inside them, find the structural design flaws, and collapse the entire system onto her pristine, chemically fertilized lawn. The pressure began to mount immediately. On Thursday, when I hadn't removed the feeders, Brenda's golf cart returned. She didn't even get out this time. She simply paused at the curb, staring directly at my front window, and made a slow, deliberate notation on her clipboard. A second envelope arrived by Friday afternoon. This one was delivered by certified mail, the ultimate weapon of the suburban bureaucrat. You have to sign your name on a digital stylus just to receive your own financial ruin. The postman, a friendly guy named Steve who knew the drama, gave me a sympathetic look. "She's on a tear today, Arthur," he whispered. "Just gave the Hendersons a citation because their welcome mat had excessive blue hues. Good luck." The second notice officially assessed the first daily compounding fine of $100. The letter, drafted by a high-priced corporate law firm in the city that probably charged the HOA $500 an hour, was filled with terrifying multisyllabic legal threats. It spoke of procedural negligence, willful noncompliance, and Brenda's personal favorite, unauthorized architectural modifications leading to the degradation of community aesthetic harmony. It threatened to place an immediate fast-track lien on my home and initiate foreclosure proceedings if the balance wasn't settled within 30 days. Living in a deed-restricted community in Florida is a bizarre form of voluntary servitude. The HOA actually possessed the legal authority to foreclose on a $500,000 house over a two-digit fine. It was an unregulated, tyrannical system run by people who peaked as high school hall monitors. I walked down my hallway into my home office, closed the blinds, and turned on my dual monitors. The bright, cold blue light washed over my face as I booted up my system. My desk, usually reserved for half-finished graphic design layouts and coffee mugs, was transformed into an ecological war room. I downloaded the entire 300-page PDF of the Whispering Pines CCNRs. It was a masterpiece of legal overkill, likely copy-pasted from a generic developer template written in 1994. I poured a healthy double of bourbon, adjusted my reading glasses, and started my deep dive. I spent the next 6 hours acting like a forensic data auditor. I read about acceptable mailbox post girth. I read about the approved shades of mulch, only dark brown or midnight black. Red mulch was classified as an aesthetic hazard. I read about the complete prohibition of whimsical lawn statuary. Bylaw 9B had successfully banned garden gnomes in 2019. My fingers flew across the keyboard, cross-referencing definitions, searching for any omission, any contradiction, any tiny crack in the armor of their beige bylaws. And then at 3:42 in the morning, my eyes burning from the screen glare, I hit the jackpot. Brenda had cited me under Section 4.7c for unauthorized attached structures because of my wooden bird feeders. But as I flipped the page, my finger traced a tiny asterisk that led to the fine print of Chapter 14, Accessory Landscaping and Environmental Improvements. The bylaw defined a structure strictly as any man-made object permanently or temporarily placed upon the surface of the lawn. But under Section 14.2, which had likely been inserted decades ago to secure a green living tax credit for the original developer, the rules were beautifully, gloriously silent on living foliage and environmental restorations. The text read, "Homeowners are encouraged to maintain healthy native vegetative barriers and natural flora to promote water conservation and enhance local biodiversity. No HOA aesthetic approval or permit is required for the cultivation of indigenous species planted directly into the soil, provided they do not encroach upon neighboring property lines or obstruct municipal utility easements." I leaned back in my chair, a slow, predatory grin spreading across my face. Brenda had banned my wooden bird feeders. She had declared the plastic tubes and cedar perches to be non-compliant. But she couldn't touch my soil. She couldn't touch my right to plant native vegetation. If I couldn't feed the birds from a wooden tray, I would turn my entire lawn into a self-sustaining, state-protected ecological engine. I would invite the birds to a buffet they didn't have to perch on. And best of all, I would do it using the highest legal authority in the United States. To ensure my ecological spite project was completely legally untouchable, I needed a shield that sat much higher up the regulatory food chain than Brenda's 3-inch binder of HOA rules. I knew that local covenants were contracts, but contracts cannot violate state law, and state law cannot violate federal law. I needed a federal nuke. I opened a new browser tab and navigated to the official database of the United States Federal Communications Commission, FCC, and the Department of the Interior. I dragged my mouse through pages of dense administrative codes until I stumbled upon a legal blog post from a property rights group. I read through cases of homeowners who had successfully fought restrictive covenants by invoking federal statutes. My heart began to hammer against my ribs. I had found the Migratory Bird Treaty Act of 1918 MBTA codified at 16 U.S.C. sections 703-712, the The MBTA is one of the oldest and most powerful environmental laws in the country. It is a strict liability federal statute that makes it unlawful to pursue hunt, take, capture, kill, attempt to take, or harass any migratory bird, its nest, or its eggs. The list of protected species was massive, encompassing nearly every native bird in North America, including my morning companions, the northern cardinal, Cardinalis cardinalis, and the American goldfinch, Spinus tristis. To gather more precise scientific data, I reached out to Dr. Ilara Vance, an ornithologist at the State University who specialized in urban avian ecosystems. She was a brilliant, eccentric academic who spent her days tracking bird migration patterns from Canada to South America. When I explained my situation, she let out a delighted, high-pitched laugh. "Arthur, this is a magnificent opportunity for public education," she said. "Your property lies directly along the Atlantic Flyway, a major migratory route. During the spring and autumn migrations, thousands of birds, including protected warblers, thrushes, and finches, require critical stopover habitats to feed on native berries and seeds. The American goldfinch, for example, is highly dependent on native seeds and thistle for sustenance during its seasonal flights, while the northern cardinal utilizes the thick undergrowth of native holly bushes to protect its young from aerial predators. We can introduce highly specific migratory nesting boxes equipped with environmental sensors. If you establish a certified habitat, you are legally contributing to a federal conservation initiative. Under the Endangered Species Act in the MBTA, any deliberate disruption of an active nesting site is a federal offense. I will gladly draft a formal 50-page ecological survey certifying your lawn as a high-value stopover habitat, complete with botanical classifications and nesting logs. This document will serve as a legal barrier that no local code inspector or HOA board will dare to touch. Furthermore, under the state's environmental preemption codes, any property that is officially registered and certified as an active conservation habitat, an educational corridor, is granted an absolute shield against local aesthetic covenants. The state codes explicitly forbid homeowners associations from enforcing minor aesthetic nuisance bylaws, such as those regarding weed height, unmanicured vegetation, or wildlife attraction, if those rules directly interfere with the active documented maintenance of a state-registered habitat. If Brenda tried to force me to cut down native berry bushes or dismantle nesting boxes containing active migratory bird nests, she wouldn't just be violating her own bylaws. She would be committing a federal offense. She would be taking or harassing a federally protected species. The statutory fines for an illegal take under the MBTA carried penalties of up to $15,000 per occurrence, and the liability would fall directly on the individuals authorizing the action. The trap was completely designed. The blueprint was set. I wasn't just going to put up a fight. I was going to construct a living, breathing, chirping federal fortress right in my front yard. I was going to transform my boring rectangle of crunchy, dormant Kentucky bluegrass into a dense, wet, glorious native wetland habitat. The next morning, I was on the phone with a local contractor who specialized in large-scale restorations in heavy excavation. His name was Big Tony. Tony was a massive, blunt-talking man who looked like he wrestled concrete mixers for cardiovascular exercise. "Arthur," Tony's deep, gravelly voice rumbled through my headset. "I've done work in Whispering Pines before. I did a patio for a guy on Elm Street, and some lady with a clipboard made my guys resaw a block of stone 3 times because she claimed the texture was insufficiently serene. I hate those people. I charge an emergency rate, but if you're telling me we are building a project that is going to make her visor-wearing head explode, I'll bring the heavy excavator myself." "Tony," I smiled, "pack the excavator. We're going to turn my yard into a national park." On Monday morning, the invasion of Whispering Pines began. At precisely 7:01 a.m., the exact minute local noise ordinances permitted construction to commence, the roaring diesel engine of Big Tony's F-350 rumbled into the cul-de-sac. Behind him came a flatbed truck carrying a heavy John Deere mini excavator, a concrete mixer, and 3 flatbeds loaded with high-density, mature native vegetation. The noise was glorious. It sounded like a dragon was attempting to dig its way out of the subterranean depths of suburbia, and hell was located directly in my front yard. Tony's crew worked with the silent, brutal efficiency of a military unit, unloading shovels, rebar, and rolls of heavy rubber liner. Neighbors began to peek through their vinyl blinds, whispering and pointing at the sudden arrival of heavy machinery on my quiet, sterile street. Brenda emerged from her house within 90 seconds. She was clutching her clipboard like a shield, her face, a thundercloud of righteous fury as she power-walked across the asphalt. She stopped at my property line, staying exactly 3 inches back, honoring the boundary like a vampire waiting for an invitation. "Mr. Miller," she shrieked over the deafening roar of the excavator. "What in the name of God is this? Shut this machinery down immediately. You do not have Architectural Review Committee approval for whatever this environmental catastrophe is." I stepped off my porch, holding a laminated folder in one hand and a fresh cup of coffee in the other. I gave her my most polite, neighborly smile. "Good morning, Brenda," I called out over the engine noise. "Just performing some necessary property maintenance, improving our local ecological footprint as encouraged by Chapter 14 of our own CCNRs. "This is not maintenance," she screamed, gesturing wildly at Tony's crew, who were currently gouging a massive 9-foot-wide trench right through the center of my lawn. "You are destroying the visual continuity of the neighborhood. I am issuing an immediate cease and desist. I am fining you $5,000 for unapproved excavation." "I appreciate your concern, Brenda," I replied, tapping my laminated folder. "But you might want to look at the paperwork before you start writing checks." I checked the bylaws. Section 9F3 explicitly permits contiguous water features such as ornamental streams or brooks in front yards, provided they do not exceed 10 feet in width, are professionally installed with a rubber liner, and incorporate a circulating pump to prevent water stagnation. This trench is exactly 9 feet wide and 11 inches deep. It is legally a water feature, not a hole, and since it's under 12 inches, it doesn't require a city building permit. Brenda's face went from its usual pale pink to a fascinating, non-compliant shade of crimson. Her clipboard was shaking so hard the metal clip was rattling. "I will sue you," she gasped. "I will have the city code enforcement here within the hour." "Go ahead, Brenda," I said, taking a sip of my coffee. "I've already filed the paperwork with the city. We have our excavation permit right here." Tony didn't stop. His crew laid down a heavy-duty commercial-grade EPDM rubber liner along the bottom of the winding 9-foot-wide stream bed. They lined the edges with massive weathered field stones and river rocks from the Appalachian foothills, porous natural materials that would naturally filter the water, harbor beneficial microorganisms, and provide perfect perches for birds to bathe and drink. Tony's workers carefully set each stone by hand, ensuring that the alignment of the rocks created natural ripples in the water, generating a pleasant, bubbling white noise. To ensure the soil stayed damp and acidic enough to support our wetland plants, Tony brought in a specialized organic peat mixture, tamping it down along the stream banks to create a sponge-like soil structure. At the head of the stream near my front porch, they constructed a beautiful cascading rock waterfall that tumbled over 3 tiers of slate, powered by a silent solar-powered submersible pump. But we weren't just building a stream, we were planting the ecosystem. While Tony's crew finished the hardscaping, another flatbed began unloading the vegetation. We didn't plant polite manicured boxwoods or sterile non-fruiting ornamental grasses. We went full native. We planted thick, dense clumps of Sambucus canadensis, elderberry, and Ilex opaca, American holly, 2 species of native shrubs that are famous for producing massive yields of bright, juicy berries. To the untrained eye of Brenda Holloway, it looked like a tangled, unruly wall of green brush. But to the local bird population, it was a 5-star all-you-can-eat buffet. Along the edges of the stream we planted Asclepias tuberosa, butterfly weed, and Typha latifolia, cattails, creating a lush, vibrant, wet soil environment that smelled of damp earth and organic victory. The final touch was the signage. I had commissioned a local metal fabrication shop to create 3 professional-grade rust-proof aluminum signs. They were painted in a serious federal-looking color scheme, a dark green background with bold, crisp white lettering, and the official logo of the National Wildlife Federation. The signs read, "Warning, National Wildlife Federation, Certified Wildlife Habitat. Property ID number 442B. This property provides essential food, water cover, and nesting sites for migratory birds. This habitat is registered and protected under federal law, Migratory Bird Treaty Act, 16 U.S.C., Sections 703-712. Unauthorized entry, disturbance of vegetation, or harassment of wildlife within this boundary is a federal violation subject to civil and criminal penalties." I bolted the signs to heavy iron posts and drove them deep into the soil along the edge of the sidewalk, right at eye level for anyone standing on the public walkway. By Friday afternoon, my front yard was gone. In its place stood a winding, gurgling, beautiful native wetland oasis. The waterfall splashed merrily, the river rocks glistened under the Florida sun, and the first few scout birds, a pair of curious goldfinches, had already discovered the hollyberries. Brenda stood at the edge of her driveway across the street, peering through a pair of high-powered birdwatching binoculars. Her empire was beginning to show stress fractures, and she was about to make a very expensive, very public mistake. The climax of the physical standoff occurred on Tuesday morning. I was sitting on my porch enjoying the pleasant rushing sound of my waterfall when a white Scottsdale Police Department SUV rumbled into the cul-de-sac. Behind it came a city code enforcement truck in Brenda's taupe-colored golf cart. Four people emerged. Officer Miller, a veteran cop who looked like he had responded to entirely too many petty neighbor disputes in his career. Officer Davis, his younger, visibly nervous rookie partner, Dave, the city building inspector, and Brenda. Brenda was practically vibrating with vindictive anticipation. She pointed a trembling finger at my glistening wetland. "Officers, Inspector!" She shrieked, her voice echoing off the stucco facades of the quiet houses. "There he is, the man who has turned our prestigious deed-restricted subdivision into an open-air swamp. He has dug an illegal canal, he is harboring dangerous wild animals, and he has erected offensive, threatening signage. I want him cited, I want the structures dismantled, and I want those birds removed." Officer Miller let out a long, heavy sigh that seemed to carry the collective exhaustion of every police officer in the state of Florida. He walked up my driveway, his hand resting loosely on his duty belt, and looked at my stream. "Arthur," Miller said, his voice a deep, tired rumble. "We got a call about a hazardous environmental contamination and an unlicensed commercial zoo at this address. You want to tell me what's going on here?" I stood up, walked down the porch steps, and handed Miller my waterproof laminated red folder, the Sovereign Justice Special. "Good morning, Officer Miller, Officer Davis," I said pleasantly. "There is no hazard here, and certainly no zoo. What you are looking at is a legally permitted, professionally installed landscape enhancement. I am simply maintaining an official registered wildlife conservation habitat." Dave, the city inspector, stepped forward with his digital clipboard. He walked along the edge of the rocks, measuring the width of the stream with his laser rangefinder and checked the depth with his boot. When Brenda shrieked that I was constructing a subterranean missile silo or hiding hazardous waste containers under the peat, Dave let out a quiet snort of laughter. "The water feature is 9 feet wide," Dave reported to Miller, looking slightly impressed. "And it's less than a foot deep. It meets all municipal residential hardscaping guidelines. He has a valid excavation permit, and the pump is solar-powered. There are no city code violations on the water. It's totally up to code." "But the vegetation," Brenda screamed, pushing past Officer Davis. "The weeds, look at those tangled, messy bushes. They exceed the community height limit of 48 inches. They are a blight." "Actually, Brenda," I said, pointing to the metal NWF signs, "those are native elderberry and American holly plants. They are listed on the Florida Department of Environmental Protection's Native Species Registry. And as of yesterday, this property has been officially certified and designated as a certified wildlife habitat by the National Wildlife Federation and the state. Here is our official registration certificate." I pulled the gold-embossed certificate out of my folder and handed it to Miller. "And here," I continued, pulling out a second highlighted document, "is the Federal Migratory Bird Treaty Act of 1918. As you can see, officers, we currently have 3 active nests of northern cardinals and American goldfinches in those native holly bushes. Those are federally protected migratory species. Under 16 U.S.C. Section 703. Any attempt to cut down those bushes, disturb the nests, or force me to remove the habitat would constitute an illegal take and harassment of protected federal resources." Brenda scoffed loudly. "This is ridiculous. This is my neighborhood. My bylaws say no unapproved vegetation. The HOA contract overrides your stupid bird laws. I have hired a landscaping crew, and they will be here tomorrow morning to scrape this entire lot back down to compliant grass." Miller looked at Brenda, then down at the highlighted federal statute, then back at the glistening metal signs. "Ma'am," Miller said, his voice dropping to a flat, no-nonsense register, "let me explain something to you very clearly. A homeowners association covenant is a private civil contract. It does not supersede federal environmental law. If your crew touches those bushes, or if you order their removal while there are active nests in them, you are committing a federal felony. The federal fines start at $15,000 per occurrence, and under the joint liability provisions, you and every member of your board will be personally liable for the damages. Furthermore, the Department of the Interior has a specific joint enforcement division with the state to protect migratory nesting habitats. If you proceed with this forced clearance, I will personally contact Agent Reynolds at the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and he will show up here with a federal warrant. I am not going to federal prison because you don't like the look of a holly bush. But the noise, Brenda wailed, her voice cracking into a high-pitched squeak. The birds, they hoot, they chirp, they scream. They are disrupting my peace. They are exceeding the decibel limits. Officer Davis, the rookie, pulled out his digital decibel meter and held it up toward the waterfall. The waterfall and the birds are registering at 42 decibels, ma'am, Davis reported. The ambient street noise is 40. The limit for residential noise during daylight hours is 55. They are well within the legal limit. This is an outrage, Brenda shrieked, stomping her white sneaker against the asphalt. You are useless. The police are supposed to protect us. Ma'am, Miller said, his patience finally snapping. This is a civil matter. There is no crime being committed here. This gentleman is in full compliance with municipal codes and his habitat is federally protected. If you try to touch his yard or his birds, we will be back, but we won't be citing him. We will be arresting you. Have a good day. The two officers tipped their caps to me, walked back to their SUV, and drove off. Dave, the city inspector, followed them, giving me a subtle, quick thumbs up through his window. Brenda stood on my driveway, her visor slightly askew, completely legally neutralized. I smiled, took a sip of my coffee, and looked at the cardinal sitting in the holly bush. Checkmate, Brenda, I whispered. Brenda was defeated at the property line, but she was a woman with a bruised ego and a desperate need for control. She wasn't going to let her administrative empire crumble without one final nuclear attempt at retaliation. 3 days later, I received an email notification from the HOA portal. It was a formal summons to an emergency closed session disciplinary hearing of the Whispering Pines Board of Directors. The agenda was short and terrifying. Vote to finalize a $5,000 punitive assessment against Lot 4220 for willful architectural noncompliance and authorize immediate foreclosure proceedings to recoup the outstanding balance. Brenda was playing her final card. She was banking on the fact that even if her bylaws were legally questionable, a normal homeowner couldn't afford the legal fees required to fight an HOA in civil court. She was going to try to bleed me dry. But I had spent the last 2 weeks doing more than just planting bushes. I had spent those nights doing what I did best: data analysis. Every HOA is a registered nonprofit corporation, which means they are legally required to file public financial disclosures, operating account ledgers, and reserve fund audits. Most residents never look at these documents. They simply pay their $150 monthly dues and assume the money is going toward the community pool and mowing the common areas. With the help of my roommate Alex, a philosophy student who paid his way through school by doing gig economy deliveries and who possessed an unparalleled talent for organizational cynicism, we transformed our dining room table into a secondary war room. We spent 72 continuous hours matching every canceled check from Gilded Oaks' general ledger to independent vendor registration databases. We cross-referenced transactions, analyzed invoice numbers, and examined the signatures on check copies. We found several highly suspicious reimbursements made out directly to Brenda's personal bank account for essential administrative supplies, which turned out to be invoices from online retail stores for high-end electronics, curved gaming monitors, and mechanical keyboards that were currently sitting in her personal home study. What we found was a systematic, years-long pattern of padded invoices and blatant financial self-dealing. Thursday evening arrived. The emergency meeting was held in the Community Recreation Center, a depressing windowless brick building that smelled permanently of stale coffee, lemon polish, and administrative despair. The room was packed. Word of Guttergate and the bird sanctuary had spread through the subdivision like wildfire. 80 residents were crammed into the folding metal chairs, whispering excitedly. At the front of the room, behind a long folding table draped with a cheap plastic tablecloth, sat the 5 members of the HOA board. In the center was Brenda, wearing her finest beige blazer and a neck brace she had likely put on just to look like the victim of emotional distress. To her left was Gary, the nervous, sweating treasurer, who kept running a handkerchief over his forehead. To her left sat the HOA's corporate attorney, a slick guy in a $3,000 suit named Sterling, who looked like he charged by the syllable. Brenda banged a small wooden gavel against the plastic table. This emergency session of the Whispering Pines Homeowners Association is called to order, she announced, her voice projecting through the screeching microphone. We are here tonight to address the catastrophic ongoing structural and aesthetic violations at Lot 4220. The homeowner, Mr. Jack Miller, has engaged in a deliberate campaign of environmental and regulatory hostility. He has ignored community standards. He has refused to pay his legally levied fines, and he has constructed a dangerous, unapproved wetland that threatens the property values of this entire community. She clicked a button, and a grainy, zoomed-in photo of my waterfall and the NWF signs appeared on the projector screen behind her. Tonight, the board will vote to authorize our legal counsel to place an immediate non-judicial lien on Mr. Miller's property and initiate foreclosure. Brenda said, looking at me with a cold, predatory smile. Mr. Miller, do you have anything to say before the board votes? I stood up slowly. I wasn't wearing my usual graphic designer sweatpants. I had put on my sharpest tailored navy suit. I walked down the center aisle holding a thick professional-grade black leather binder with color-coded tabs. Thank you, Madam President. I said, my voice calm, clear, and perfectly projected. I do have a few things to say, but before we discuss my native garden, I think we need to talk about the budget. Sterling, the corporate attorney, leaned forward. Mr. Miller, this is a compliance hearing. The budget is not on the agenda. It's on my agenda, counselor, I said, stepping right up to the board table and dropping 6 identical copies of my leather binder onto the plastic tablecloth. They landed with a heavy, authoritative thud. I suggest you open the tab labeled Pristine Vistas LLC, specifically the line items from last November. Gary, the treasurer, turned a shade of gray that matched the Navajo white paint palette. Over the past 18 months, I said, addressing the 80 silent neighbors behind me, our HOA dues have increased by 20%. We were told this was due to unforeseen pool maintenance and emergency gate repairs. But according to the general operating ledger, the HOA has paid exactly $42,000 to a landscape consulting firm called Pristine Vistas LLC. A murmur went through the folding chairs. I did a corporate registry search on Pristine Vistas LLC. I continued, locking eyes with Brenda. The registered statutory agent is a man named Kyle Halloway. Kyle Halloway is Brenda's brother. Brenda, your own signature is on the checks. You have been pulling $3,500 a month out of our community reserve fund to pay your own brother for aesthetic consulting. Furthermore, I called the contractor who did our pool deck last spring. He admitted on tape, which is transcribed under tab C, that he was forced to inflate his quote by $5,000 to pay a consulting fee back to Pristine Vistas LLC. We even found an invoice for clubhouse office supplies totaling $1,250 that was reimbursed to Brenda, which actually purchased a curved 32-inch high-end gaming monitor and mechanical keyboard now sitting in her personal home office. The recreation center erupted. It wasn't just murmurs anymore. It was absolute unmitigated pandemonium. People were standing up. Neighbors were shouting. Old Mr. Peterson, who had been fined $50 last year because his garden hose was coiled clockwise instead of counterclockwise, stood up and shook his fist. "She's stealing our money," he yelled. "She's paying her brother with our dues." "Lies," Brenda shrieked, banging her gavel frantically, but the head of the gavel flew off and skittered across the floor. "These are slanderous, defamatory accusations, Arnold. Make him stop." Sterling, the corporate attorney, didn't look at Brenda. He was rapidly reading through my highlighted bank statements and the corporate registration documents. He slowly took off his expensive reading glasses, closed my binder, and leaned over to whisper something in Brenda's ear. I saw the exact moment the reality hit her. Her eyes widened, her chest heaved, and the color completely drained from her face. "The corporate shield of an HOA board member only covers negligence," I said, looking directly at Brenda. "Our board is on the hook, and because you acted outside the scope of your authority, your D&O insurance will not cover you. If this board votes to place a lien on my house tonight, my next phone call isn't to a real estate lawyer. It's to Detective Aaron Kim at the White Collar Crime Division of the County Sheriff's Department. I've already prepared the dossier. The evidence is complete. We can resolve this civilly, or we can resolve this criminally. The choice is yours, Brenda." Sterling stood up, buttoning his jacket. "The board," Sterling announced to the roaring room, looking incredibly defeated, "moves to table the compliance vote indefinitely. Furthermore, the board hereby rescinds all outstanding fines and citations against Lot 4220. This session is adjourned." The board members fled the room through the side door, leaving Brenda standing alone at the front of the stage, her clipboard dropped on the floor, her empire completely and utterly shattered. A week after the disastrous recreation center meeting, the formal surrender arrived. It wasn't a pink slip taped to my door. It was a crisp, white, legally vetted letter delivered by certified mail. The new interim board, led by a laid-back guy named Steve who lived down the street and mostly just wanted to grill meats on Saturdays, had officially taken over after Brenda's resignation. The letter was a formal, unconditional waiver of every single fine citation and lien threat against my property. It included a paragraph apologizing for the inappropriate enforcement measures of the previous administration. It also noted that the new board was immediately hiring an independent external forensic accountant to audit the entire financial history of the association. Brenda's house went on the market 3 days later. She sold it at a slight loss and moved to a gated community in Naples, Florida, presumably to start a brand new campaign of terror against a whole new population of unsuspecting retirees. But she would have to do it without her clipboard, as her husband's law firm was currently too busy dealing with the fallout of the county sheriff's financial investigation to help her write new bylaws. With the tyrant gone, the neighborhood experienced a quiet, green, and wonderfully chaotic rebirth. The spirit of weaponized compliance was contagious. The Hendersons, who had been fined for years over a single plastic flamingo, went full theater. They put up a red velvet rope cordon around the flamingo and installed a tiny solar-powered spotlight to illuminate it at night. Another neighbor on the corner painted their non-compliant garage door with a giant, beautiful mural of the solar system. The neighborhood aesthetics no longer resembled a sterile, bleached beige prison camp. They looked like a vibrant, minimalist, post-apocalyptic art installation. Now, instead of hiding from the HOA, the residents of Whispering Pines gather on my front porch to watch the wildlife. My neighbors often bring over 6 packs of beer and trade birdwatching tips. We sit on the deck chairs, laughing about Brenda's old visor and clipboard, feeling a deep shared sense of suburban liberation. As for me, my front yard wetland is thriving. It is now late summer, and the native elderberries are heavy with ripe, juicy fruit. The gurgling waterfall provides a steady, soothing soundtrack that completely drowns out the distant hum of the highway. I am sitting on my front porch, nursing a fresh glass of cold-brewed coffee, watching The Daily Show. The Aviary Cafe is currently packed. A brilliant, bright red cardinal. Big Red himself is sitting on a flat stone in the middle of the stream, happily splashing water over his wings. Next to him, a squadron of American goldfinches are bickering over the elderberries, their yellow feathers lashing through the deep green leaves like tiny flashes of lightning. Every now and then, a ruby-throated hummingbird drops by the butterfly weed, its wings buzzing at an impossible frequency, and a downy woodpecker tackles the bark of the old maple. They don't have to perch on a non-compliant wooden tray anymore. They are eating directly from the earth, protected by the full crushing weight of the United States federal government. I take a slow, satisfying sip of my coffee. The air is warm, the stream is rushing, and the birds are hooting. I look across the street at the empty driveway where Brenda's golf cart used to sit, and I smile. Sometimes the rules are just words on a page. But if you read those words carefully enough, they become a blueprint for your greatest, most peaceful, and most beautifully malicious victory.